All right, welcome one and all. This is Mishnah in Depth, Masechet Nazir, where today we have the pleasure of learning Nazir and Sotah with Rav Avie Walfish. This is the second of five sessions on this junk. This Mishnah in Depth is sponsored by the Rosenwein family in memory of Rifka Rosenwein, and as part of our Mishnah division, also sponsored in Rifka Rosenwein's memory. If you are just coming on, this class is designed to accompany independent daily study of the Mishnah following the Mishnah Yomit schedule. We will meet weekly as a community of learners to augment our independent study and enhance our learning. And we are assuming a bit that you've at least reviewed the Mishnah Yomi of the week. For those who have not had the pleasure of learning with him, Rav Avie Walfish is a retired teacher of Talmudic literature and rabbinic thought, the head of the Halachic Beit Midrash at the Beit Hillel Rabbinic Organization. He is a graduate of Yeshiva University for undergraduate and a student of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and Rabbi Yosef B. Soloveitchik. He received his rabbinic ordination from Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg and completed his master's and doctorate at Hebrew University, writing on literary features of the Mishnah. He has taught in many locations in Israel, published widely, including on the Iyun Mishnah website and on a commentary on Mishnah Brachot, Mishnaic tapestries, and he is a recipient of the prize of the Israeli Minister of Education. For those just coming in on Zoom, I am going to go send promotions to panelists. You can accept those and be able to ask questions directly, unmute yourself, turn on your camera, see your face, which are all excellent things. If you can't or don't want to, or you're joining us on Facebook, please do not hesitate to ask questions in chat. We want to hear questions. I will bring them to Rabbi Walfish's attention when I see them. And with that, thank you everyone for joining. Links will be posted to source sheets in chat, and they are also on screen. And with that, Rabbi, the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, so let's start off by just we're going to look at the first two chapters of Nazir, which roughly correspond to what you're supposed to have looked at this week, covering some of the material from last week as well, which we didn't get a chance to really go into. Last week we gave a kind of general introduction to the topic of Nazirut. You have here up on the screen the text of the Torah's passage about Nazirut, and we saw that the term Nazir actually is given two meanings in the passage. First meaning is miyayin v'shechar yazir, okay, to separate yourself. And the second one is Nezer Elohav al Rosho, a crown of God upon his head. Of course, we can understand etymologically the two are related. The king is also someone set apart. A crown is something that sets one apart. Nevertheless, they're clearly linguistically very different. Talk about separating yourself from certain pleasures on the one hand, and on the other hand, to have a crown of God upon your head. So these are two different aspects of a Nazir as the Torah describes him, and we'll be coming back to that shortly. We also discussed that if you go through not just the Torah, you go through the Tanakh, we find other models of Nazir, and we find, opposed to the Torah, talking about a term of Nazirut. Look here at Psukim Hey, Vav, Chet, Kol Yemei Ned, or actually starts with Dalet. Kol Yemei Nizro, Kol Yemei Neder Nizro, Kol Yemei Haziro, Kol Yemei Nizro. All of the days of his Nazirut, and there's a description in the Torah of the sacrificial ritual, which concludes his term as a Nazir. But as opposed to that, we have the most famous Nazir in the Tanakh, Shimshon, who is a lifetime Nazir, and whose laws are clearly different from the laws here in the Torah. For example, we have no indication that he is forbidden to drink wine. His mother was forbidden to drink wine during his pregnancy, but he himself was not. What he does share with the Nazir is growing his hair, not cutting his hair. There is no indication that there was any prohibition upon him of coming into contact with the dead. In fact, we have every reason to believe that he came into contact with many dead people. So, so clearly, the lifetime Nazir, namely Shimshon, is something that has similarity to the Nazir as described here in the Torah in Bamidbar chapter 6, but it's clearly not the same thing. Then we have Nazirim, who are paragons of sanctity. Amos, the prophet, compares the Nazir to the prophet and says that God establishes or sets up Nazirim. So these are people called by God to live a life of sanctity, and in a way that's parallel to that of prophet. So again, two models of lifetime Nazir as opposed to the part-time Nazir that we have described in this chapter. Okay, in the first chapter of Masechet Nazir, we will have some talk about lifetime Nazirim. Okay, but before getting to that, themes that will be very central, not only in these chapters that we'll be looking at tonight, but throughout Tractate Nazir, have to do with the first point. Okay, again, the words I have bolded and colored, Lahazir and Yazir and Nezer Elohav. Okay, these words clearly indicate some of the main issues that need to be addressed. Okay, is the Nazir primarily Lahazir, Miyayin v'Shechar Yazir, or is he primarily Nezer Elohav al Rosho? Now, let's think about that for a moment. Lahazir, okay, as a verb, is referring to one of the particular laws of the Nazir, namely that he has to separate himself from wine or any kind of grape or grape product. Okay, now the term Yazir reminds us very much of a term that's also relevant to Tractate Nazir as a whole, and that is the root Nun Zayin Resh. Sounds a lot like
Neder.
Neder, Nun Dalid Resh. And in fact, in Semitic languages, we not infrequently find Dalid and Zayin being interchanged. Okay, and that's of course interesting because the previous tractate that we studied was Tractate Nidarim. Last week we also did a kind of overview of Tractate Nidarim. So Nidarim and Nazir have this in common. And a Neder also, most of Tractate Nidarim is about the kind of Neder in which a person vows to separate himself from certain pleasures. That's the usual kind of Neder that we're talking about in Tractate Nidarim. And a Nazir then is a form of a Neder, Mi'ayin v'Shechar Yazir. Okay, on the other hand, something about the Nazir that is very different from the Neder is Nezer Elohav al Rosho. And that's referring to another aspect of the Nazir. What is this crown of God upon his head? What is it?
His hair.
His hair. The unshorn hair is Nezer Elohav al Rosho. We noted last week that this term, Nezer Elohav al Rosho, is very reminiscent of the Kohen Gadol, which in turn plugs into another key word in the chapter, which is Kadosh. The Nazir is Nazir Lashem, and he is Kadosh in Pasuk Hey. And once again in Pasuk Chet, Kadoshu Lashem. And in Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'kidash et Rosho. And as opposed to what he's supposed to be, which is Kadosh, you have Tameh. So the third law of Nazirut seems to be very much related to the hair. Doesn't seem really so much related to the wine. Okay, it's hard to think about not drinking wine and not becoming defiled through contact with the dead. Is there a connection between the two of them? Hard to see one. But is there a connection between growing your hair long and having your long hair as a crown of God upon your head, reminiscent of a high priest, of a Kohen Gadol, and not to defile yourself through contact with the dead? Let's take a look at Pasuk Tet. V'chiyamut meit alav befeta pitom v'timei rosh nizro. He's not supposed to defile himself through contact with the dead. But what if he's walking in the street and all of a sudden he stumbles over a body, a corpse of a human being, that just person drops dead right in front of him. He comes in contact with it. He can't avoid it. So the Torah says, "V'timei rosh nizro," that will defile his Nazir head, his hair. And in fact, when he's supposed to observe a period of 7 days of purification, like anyone else who is defiled through contact with the dead, and at the end of those 7 days, he's supposed to bring sacrifices to restart his period of Nazirut. And that's what it says in Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'kidash et Rosho bayom hahu. He will re-sanctify his head. Part of the Korban process is to cut his hair. The hair has become defiled. He is no longer sanctified. So he has to purify himself, cut off the hair that has been defiled, and then start growing the hair anew. So there's a very clear connection and correlation between three terms here. Okay, the prohibition against cutting the hair, the prohibition of coming into contact with the dead, and his sanctity. These three are all bound up with one another. He is sanctified as long as he is growing his hair long and it's becoming, and it is not being defiled through contact with the dead. If he either cuts his hair or defiles himself through contact with the dead, that impugns his sanctity. And then he has to restart his period of Nazirut. Okay, so now this interaction among these three aspects of Nazirut, not drinking wine, or any other grape product, okay, which sounds a lot like a specific kind of a neder, and on the other hand, you have growing the hair long and something that's interrelated with it, not defiling himself through contact with the dead. Okay, so these are all different aspects. As we'll see, one of the main questions that will interest us is, which of these is the main feature of a Nazir? Is a Nazir somebody who basically wants to become a teetotaler, so he separates himself from wine and grape products? And since he's doing this within the framework of being a Nazir, that carries with it certain other aspects. It means he has to grow his hair long, he has to avoid contact with the dead, or does it work in reverse? Basically, the Nazir is someone who is sanctifying himself by growing his hair long. Okay, and as part of his sanctity, he also has to vow not to drink wine. Okay, so is this a package deal? Is one somehow an offshoot of the other? These are some of the issues that can be raised already in the Torah, and that will accompany us as we go through the Mishnah. Okay, now let's start off by running through some of the Mishnayot in chapter 1, and as we do that, we'll make some comments and see where these Mishnayot lead us. Because, as I said at the beginning of last week's class, I try very much to learn not Mishnayot, individual Mishnah units, as much as Mishnah. Okay, look at the text of the Mishnah. Text, by the way, in English, as in Hebrew, comes from a word that means to weave. Okay, a text, like texture or textile. Okay, so a text means you take different elements and you integrate them, you weave them together. In Hebrew, a tractate is called a masechet. A masechet is a loom, something on which you weave. Same idea. Okay, tractate means you've taken units and you've woven them together. Okay, so we're going to try to see how things are woven together, where the larger units, are leading us, how the different smaller units are working together. Okay, so let's look at the first Mishnah. Kol kinuyei nezirut ke nezirut. Maybe we'll look at this with a different. We'll have it with the English translation. So those of you who haven't looked at it or who still need the translation have it in front of them. So I'm going to read it in the Hebrew. Anyone who needs to can follow it in the English. Kol kinuyei nezirut kenezirut. Haomer ehei harei ze nazir. O ehei naveh. Or nazir, nazik, naziach, paziach, harei ze nazir. Let's stop there and try to get a sense of where the Mishnah is going. Okay, so what does it mean? Kinuyei nezirut. Okay, his translation is substitutes. Okay, kinui in contemporary Hebrew is a nickname. Kinui is when you call something not by its proper name. Okay, so these are substitute languages. So normally, to be a Nazir, this is the background. It's actually stated in the Mishnah, but it really is in the background of the Mishnah before we even start it. The normal way to take a vow of Nazirut is to say, I am a Nazir, or I will be a Nazir. I take upon myself to be a Nazir. That would be the normal kind of a formula. A kinui, so let's take a look. What functions here as a kinui? Homer ehei, I will be. Why is that a kinui?
It's not exact. It's a shortening.
Right. You say, I will be. I will be what? Maybe I will be a football player. I'll be president of the United States. I could, a lot of things I could be.
I guess it depends on the context.
Exactly. The Talmud assumes that this term ehei will work only if it's said in a context that makes it clear what the intention is. For example, Talmud gives the example of you're standing in the presence of a Nazir and you say, oh, I want to be. Okay, I want to be what? Well, like that guy. like that Nazir who's standing in front of me. Without that context, it wouldn't work. Okay, but but be that as it may, we're trying to look for larger patterns. So, the specifics of how exactly we decide to fill it in, and when you can't fill it in, are not going to concern us as much. Or something a little clearer, Ehei Naveh, I will be beautiful. Well, how do you beautify yourself? This is an interesting conception. You beautify yourself by becoming a Nazir. Is a full head of hair uncut, is that something beautiful? That's an interesting question. We normally would think of such a person as ungroomed and unkempt. But there seems to be a sense, it's beautiful. Maybe it means spiritually beautiful rather than physically beautiful. Or maybe actually it does mean physically beautiful. We will see a source in a bit that might indicate that long hair was considered to be something attractive. Okay? Or then you have Nazir, Ehei Nazir, or we have some very interesting usages. Nazik, Naziach, Haziach. What's happening here? Anyone have a sense of
the Konam thing?
Okay, this is similar to Konam. Okay, and that's a very important point that we will be coming back to. But Nazik is taking the word Nazir and replacing the last letter, Resh, with a Kuf. Or Naziach is replacing the Resh with a Chet. And now what's even more interesting is Paziach replaces the last Resh with a Chet, but it also replaces the opening letter Nun with a Pei. So from the whole word Nazir, you just have one letter, Zayin. Well, Zayin Yud. Okay, you have Zayin Yud. Okay, and you have the same vowel pointing. Okay, but other than that, 2 out of the 3 main consonants are different. Okay, that also works. Now, okay, now as Nathan indicated, this is not the first time we're encountering this kind of usage. Okay, where did we encounter this kind of halachic presentation earlier? No takers? Not even Nathan? I thought
Masechet Nedarim.
good.
It talks about Konam this, which
That-
means Korban this.
Okay, so here, let's get it up here. No, wrong text. Let's get the right one here. Share screen. Yeah, this is the right one. Okay, the opening Mishnah of Nidarim. Now, take a look at the table. Nidarim opens, Kol Kinuye Nidarim Kinidarim. Nazir opens, Kol Kinuye Nazirut Kinazirut. Okay, and interestingly, Nidarim continues by saying, similar to Nidarim, you have Charamim and Shvuot and Nazirut. So here's an explicit equation between Nazir and Nidarim. So it's called Kinuye Nazirut. Kinazirut is already indicated in the opening Mishnah of Nidarim, and that's exactly how Masechet Nazir opens. Nidarim continues with some examples. Haomer, Kunam, Kunach, Kunas. Okay, so Nathan mentioned Konam. Okay, Konam is like a classic term that almost means. It's actually it's actually supposed to indicate the word korban. So if you learn Nidarim, korban is a central notion of Nidarim. Okay, So konam is the first term, but then konach. You've replaced the mem with a chet. Konas, you've replaced the mem with a samech. Harei elu kinuyim le korban. These are all kinuyim for korban. In other words, you take the word and you corrupt it, you change it around. Why do you do that?
Like how we say heck or
Yeah,
sugar. I don't know.
right. That's right. Okay, you took it in terms of curse words, but which in a way is relevant because swearing has two connotations in English the same way it has in Hebrew. Okay, to swear can be to curse, and to swear can mean to take an oath. And an oath can be something sacred or can be something negative, a kind of a curse, right? So you sort of try to tone down your curse words, but in Jewish tradition, what words
You don't
do
want to
we
be
like
held
to-
liable. You don't want to be held liable that you're taking on a vow.
Okay, so on the one hand, I think, yeah, I think what you're saying is right. But on the other hand, you're saying it in order to take the vow. So it's sort of, you want to, okay, you want to, in Hebrew, you say, Lelechet im ulehargish b'li, okay? You want to be together and feel as though you weren't. That I want to take the vow, but pretend I didn't. Okay? In other words, the language of a vow, we're talking about the power of language. Language has a power, and we're afraid of that power. And so what we do is, even when we want it to go into effect, we don't want to say the real word. And now the main place where we actually do that in Jewish tradition is the name of God.
Hashem
Oh, the name
Elohim
Hashem.
Shakai.
Take
Right.
a
We
take
use
a
the word
look at
Hashem.
the real name of Hashem is Havaya, right? Yud Kei Vav Kei. And we almost never say that. That was limited to the temple. The priests, when they blessed the people in the temple, uttered that name. Kohen Gadol in Avodat Yom Kippurim, he uttered that name. But other than that, that is a name that is never to be uttered. So we instead use the name of Adnut, okay, and Aleph Daled Nun Yud as a replacement. But guess what? What do we do with that? We don't say that either. When we're using it in everyday parlance, we say Hashem. And when we're writing it in everyday writing, you write a hey with a, with a little apostrophe, right? In other words, we're 2 steps removed from the name of God. It's not enough for us to go 1 step removed from it. We go 2 steps removed from the name of God, because the name is so sacred that just to utter the name has a power that we're afraid of, that we don't want to invoke. Okay, and you seem to have a similar thing here. It's the power of language. Language is creating something halachic. I am taking something in Nidarim, I'm taking something permissible, and I am making it forbidden as though it were sacrificial, as though it were sacred. It's not really sacred. I'm treating it as though it were. So when language has that power, okay, people, like shudder to utter the exact word. And so they created these kinuyim to avoid them, to say, well, that's what I want to do, but I don't even want to really say it. It's like saying the F word. I can't even utter that word, but I want people to know that that's what I have in mind. So I say the F word. I want it to be there, but I want it to keep it at arm's length. Okay, and that seems to be the sort of thing. That's how Nidarim opens, and that's how Nazir opens.
So
But now
today
yes.
excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting you. So today we say whatever we say, and then we say beli neder at the end. So that's similar
right.
to that.
Right. Except that there could be a real halachic concern. You say bli neder because not just of a fear of the power of the word, but a fear that it might actually take halachic effect. That's in the case where you don't want it to take halachic effect. And so I say bli neder to make it absolutely clear there is no neder involved here. But the Mishnah is talking about like the mirror image case. You want the neder to go into effect, but you don't want to say the actual word. Okay, so there is a correlation between them, but they're looking at two sides of the coin. They're not the same. Okay, now if when it comes to neder, what we're trying to keep at arm's length is the idea of something sacrificial, something sanctified to God. I want to treat something in my environment as though it were sanctified to God, and therefore I will not go near it. I will not use it. I will not benefit from it. But I don't want to actually utter terms of sanctity like korban. Okay, that's the specter that's overhanging neder, is the specter of korban. What corresponds to that when we're talking about Nazir? So here we come again to our two lines of thought. Nazir can mean to prohibit myself from wine. That's an offshoot of neder. That's looking at Nazir as basically an offshoot of neder. If a neder is a person sanctifying his environment by treating objects in his, or sometimes people in his environment, as though they were korban, they were sacrificial. Okay, so the Nazir focuses that on one specific item. Neder is general. I can apply it to virtually anything. Nazir will take that idea and focus it specifically on wine. Why wine? So I think we can all pretty much figure that out, and later on we'll see this indicated in the Mishnah, because we know what impact wine can have. Okay, and so I want to make it very clear. Okay, I am sanctifying myself by saying I'm not going near wine. Okay, and not even anything that's remotely associated with wine, such as grapes or grape products. Okay, that's one line. The other line could be that what actually corresponds to the korban we're talking about Nazir is, what's the other possibility?
Hair,
The hair. Okay, and as
which
we
is
looked
his
before,
crown.
the hair is the person.
The crown. Oh, okay.
The person of the Nazir is like a korban. Person of the Nazir is like a korban. And in fact, if we look at the hair, what do we do with the hair when the Nazirut is over?
We throw it in the fire.
We throw it in the fire underneath
The korban.
the korban that is cooking and is about to be consumed. So there is a very real sense that the Nazir is a kind of korban. Okay, now we don't believe in human sacrifice. You know, the Akedah was a kind of model of human sacrifice that the Torah right away rejects. God says to Abraham, I wanted you to be willing to sacrifice your son. I don't want the actual sacrifice of your son. No human sacrifice in reality. But a Nazir comes pretty close. He consecrates his person, and particularly his hair, and his consecrated hair winds up becoming part of the sacrificial process. He shears it off in the temple together with the sacrificial offerings, and he makes it part of a sacrificial offering. So Nazir opens by showing itself to be an offshoot of Nidarim, and these are two consecutive tractates, and clearly they're closely interrelated. And now let's move on a little bit. Okay, as the as the first Mishnah wears on, let's go back to our Sfaria. Okay. Hareini misalsel, hareini mechalkel. What aspect of Nazirut are we talking about here? Misalsel is talking about
Hair.
the hair. So really the first aspect of Nazirut that we open with in the first Mishnah talks about hair. Ehei naveh is the hair. Hareini misalsel is the hair. Hareini mechalkel, same. Harei alai l'shalach pera. L'shalach pera is
That's hair again.
Right.
That's
that's again the hair, right?
the
That's
sotah.
growing long hair. Gadel peras arosho. Harei alai tziporim. Tziporim are the bird offering. Okay, in other words, he becomes the kind of person who is required to bring an offering later. Interestingly, an offering that he brings right, to end his Nazirut. Okay, that's a question whether that makes him a Nazir or not. Okay, then we continue. Hareini Nazir min hachatzanim umin azagim. That's now referring to the grapes.
Wine.
Now talking
The
about the
wine,
grapes.
grape.
But interestingly, whereas the Torah opens with grape and moves to hair, the Mishnah opens with hair and moves to grape. Okay, that might be an indication of what the focus is as far as the Mishnah is concerned. Okay, but what is a more central feature of his Nazirut? Okay, is refraining from grapes and wine, or is growing the hair long? The Mishnah seems to focus us more on the hair, but the grapes are there as well. Hareini Nazir min hachatzanim umin hazagim, or min hatiglachat. So now what did the person say? I am a Nazir, but then he took one particular aspect of being a Nazir and singled that one out. I am a Nazir because I won't eat grape pits, because I won't eat grape peels, because I won't shave my hair. Uminatuma, I'm a Nazir because I will not defile myself through contact with the dead. You said one of the things. So what might one think, possibly? Maybe you're not really a Nazir because you focused it on one particular aspect. But the Mishnah says, Harei ze Nazir, v'chol diktukei Nazirut alav. You are a Nazir, and all details of Nazirite are incumbent upon him. Why? One word. It's the power of the word Nazir. When I say Hareini Nazir, it doesn't matter what I tack onto it. I can focus it on, right, any one of the three prohibitions. On the grape part, on the haircut part, on the defilement part. No matter what I focus attention on, I said the magic word Nazir, and that means that everything applies regardless, because it's a package deal. I can't become a Nazir for X without becoming a Nazir for Y. The Torah doesn't allow me to separate them. Or does it? Well, here it doesn't. We'll see a bit further on that maybe they can be separated, but not when I take a Nazirite vow. I take a Nazirite vow, I uttered the magic word Nazir, it's a package deal, and all the prohibitions fall into line, even if I mentioned only one of them, seeming to single it out from the others. And now we come to something very interesting. Hareini kishimshon. I will be like Shimshon. Now, what's happening here? I'm not focusing on the practices. What am I focusing on?
The personality?
The
The
person. The person. And the person is not a standard Nazir. The person is a Nazir. Did he ever take a vow of Nazirut?
No, his mother did.
No, she didn't take a vow either.
The Navi put it on her.
The Navi said it is a divine injunction.
Why are
God
we saying
made him a
be?
Nazir min habeten. God decreed he will be born a Nazir. His very essence of being born is to be a Nazir, not a vow. That's why there's an opinion not mentioned in the Mishnah, but it is mentioned in the Tosefta. There is an opinion that if you say Hareini Kishimshon, nothing happens, because you can't take a vow to be like Shimshon. God can make a person into Shimshon. A person cannot. If you take a vow to be a Nazir, you have to be an avowed Nazir. You can't be a Shimshon style Nazir. It's an oxymoron. You can't put them together. The Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah says, if you say, I will be like Shimshon, like Ben Manoach, like the husband of Dlilah, like the one who uprooted the gates of Azah, like the one whose eyes were gouged out by the Philistines, Hareza Nazir Shimshon. Then you will make yourself like a Nazir Shimshon. And the Mishnah goes ahead to establish what is a Nazir Shimshon. But before getting to that, I think it's very interesting to see how Shimshon is characterized. What did the Mishnah choose to characterize Shimshon? I could think of a lot of ways of characterizing Shimshon. For example, the one who slew thousands of Philistines. Okay, what about that? Okay, the one who brought the house down upon himself and all of the Philistines. The one who, when he was thirsty, cried out and prayed to God. Okay, the one who was described as being a savior of Israel, or at least an initial savior of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. All of those could have been mentioned. What kinds of characterizations of Shimshon do we have here? What do they tell us about how the Mishnah views Shimshon? Husband of Delilah. When did Shimshon uproot the gates of Azah? Where was he when he did that? Anyone remember?
He was visiting a zona.
That's right. He was visiting a prostitute, and the Philistines surrounded the city. They said, okay, we've got him now. And so he picked up these huge gates of Azah and carried them away with him and managed to escape that way from the ambush. Okay. He was hardly caught in a very, very honorific situation. The one whose eyes were gouged out by the Plishtim. What is the Mishnah telling us? Is it good to be like Shimshon? Okay, we don't seem to have a sense that the Mishnah looks upon Shimshon very favorably. Now, this also reminds us of the opening of Tractate Nidarim. Okay, let's go back again and look at our table here. Okay, here you have Kiven Manoch, Kival Dlilak, etc. And now let's look opposite that at Nidarim. Kinidrei Rishaim Nadar banazir uvakorban uvishvua. Kinidrek sherim lo amar klum. If I say, whether it's a neder or a nizirut or a shvuah or a korban, okay, and I say, I am taking the neder the way kosher people do, like good, upstanding, fine Jews do, then it doesn't take effect. But if I say, kinidrei rishaim, I'm taking a neder in these areas the way wicked people do, that works. What is that implying? To take a neder is a terrible thing. Shouldn't do it. Why is it a terrible thing? Well, that involves reading through all of Masechet Nedarim. I think if you read carefully through Masechet Nedarim, you'll find at least 3 or 4 answers to that question from the Mishnah. I'm not even talking about other answers we might come up with. From the Mishnah itself, we can come up with several answers. I think the main answer that the Mishnah in Nedarim tells us is that Nedarim are socially divisive. The usual use in Nedarim as you go through the entire tractate is husbands are taking Nedarim that they won't get benefit from their wives, or their wives won't get benefit from them. Fathers and sons, neighbors, they're all taking these Nedarim. I don't want to have anything to do with you. That's what a Neder does as you go through tractate. And I think that's the main reason why it's something negative. Okay, but you can find other reasons hinted at as you go through tractate Nedarim as well. And now at the beginning of Masechet Nazir, we have a similar perspective on Nazirut. The most famous Nazir, who could have been portrayed as a man of God in many respects, a judge of Israel, okay, someone who is sanctified to God. You could have looked at him favorably. The Mishnah seems to go out of its way to focus on negative portrayals of Shimshon, to indicate to us Nazirut is not really that positive. It's really something that ought to be avoided. Okay? That at least seems to be the way it's portrayed here at the beginning of the tractate. Now, I'm already going to give you a preview. When we get to the end of the tractate, Shimshon is going to make a reappearance, but together with another very well-known Nazir, and that might give us a somewhat different take on how the Mishnah wants us to view Nazirut. But at this stage, I think the Mishnah is very clearly nudging us in that direction. Okay, and now the Mishnah continues with something else. Ma bein Nazir Olam le Nazir Shimshon. We never heard of a Nazir Olam. Okay, this is a new concept for us. Nazir, Nazir Olam. Wait, here we go. Here it is. Okay, Nazir Olam. Okay, and somehow we're comparing him to a Nazir Shimshon. Nazir Olam ichbid sa'aro mekel beta'ar umevi shalosh behemot v'im nitma mevi korban tum'ah. Nazir Shimshon ichbid sa'aro eino mekel v'im nitma eino mevi korban tum'ah. A Nazir Shimshon never cuts his hair. And a Nazir Shimshon, if he becomes defiled, doesn't have to end his Nazirut and restart it. And he never brings sacrifices. A Nazir Olam, okay, a permanent Nazir, okay? A permanent Nazir, on the other hand, will cut his hair occasionally when his hair gets heavy. Mishnah doesn't tell us when that is. When does your hair get heavy?
When it's too long.
After a month. What?
When it's too long.
So it could be quite subjective. when he
Right.
can't hold his head up anymore. It could be there is an opinion that appears in the Tosefta once every 12 months. Okay? Every year he takes a haircut, but when he takes a haircut, okay, he brings sacrifices because he has to restart his Nazirut. Okay, what is this basically telling us? As opposed to our standard model of Nazirut, you take a Nazirut for a specified amount of time. The next Mishnah spells out what that is, 30 days. Okay? Specify, or you can specify another amount. You can specify 60 days, 100 days, whatever you specify. That's the standard Nazirut, and that's the Nazirut described in the Torah in Bamidbar chapter 6. As opposed to that, there are two people who spend their lives as Nazirim, but in two different ways. The Nazir Shimshon and the Nazir Olam are the two different ways. What's the major difference between them? Why is it that a Nazir Shimshon never cuts his hair, whereas the Nazir Olam occasionally cuts his hair? But when he does, he restarts the Nazirut. What's that effectively saying? Okay. Nazir Shimshon is the polar opposite of temporary Nazirut. Nazir Shimshon is God decreed that a person will live his life as a Nazir. He is a Nazir in his very essence. He's born a Nazir. He dies a Nazir. He is a Nazir no matter what he does. He can't defile it. He can't ruin it. He never restarts it because Nazirut is part of his very essence. It's part of his personality. A Nazir, or a temporary Nazir, for a temporary period of time is treated as someone holy. Now, does that make it a good thing? Not necessarily. Okay, we've said that Nazirut might be very negative. Okay, but nevertheless, it has something positive about it. He's treated as holy for a period of time. For that period of time, he has to guard his holiness, be very careful about it. At the end of it, he brings sacrifices, goes back to being an average everyday Joe. And then there's the Nazir Olam. In some ways, he's like the Nazir Shimshon, but in some ways, he's like the temporary Nazir. The Nazir Olam will live his life as a Nazir, but it will constantly being stopped and started. Okay, in other words, it's really a succession of temporary Naziruyot. Unlike the standard temporary Nazir, it never ends. Once one ends, the next one will immediately restart. But Nazirut is not part of his being. It's not part of his personhood. A person took the neder, and by taking the neder, he makes himself a Nazir who will be a Nazir till his dying day, but only because every time he ends it, the next one begins. So it's really a long succession of temporary Naziruyot. So Nazirut is less part of his fabric, and for that very reason, he has to be more careful not to defile it. He can impugn his Nazirut, and so he has to be careful not to do so. Okay, so that I think gives us, an interesting perspective on different models of Nazir. Yes. You wanted to say something, Nathan? No. Okay. Okay. Let's take a look at chapter 2. There's more to say about chapter 1, but time is short, and I do want to get to chapter 2. So the question I'm going to ask about chapter 2 is, if chapter 1 gave us this indication that Nazirut can be a state of being, not only a neder, and whether as a state of being or as a neder, it could have something very negative attached to it. Shimshon was a Nazir as a state of being. He was not always the most admirable person. Oftentimes he was not so admirable. The person who takes a neder to be a Nazir also, just as we said regarding neder, there may be something very negative about his taking upon himself to be different, to separate himself from pleasures of the world, to separate himself from the normal run of society. There's a downside to all of those things. Chapter 1 seems to focus us on that downside. Chapter 2 actually gives us a glimpse into what might motivate a person to take a vow of being a Nazir. Now, this is after we already know through the Mishnayot in chapter 1 that we didn't look at together, that the standard Nazirut is 30 days, okay? Or then a person he can't make it shorter, but he could make it longer. Chapter 2 gives us some insights into why a person might want to make himself into a Nazir. Let's take a look at 4 Mishnayot that give us 4 perspectives on why a person might want to make himself a Nazir. So we'll start with Mishnah Bet. Hareini Nazir min agrogro to min advela, Beit Shammai omrim Nazir, Beit Hillel omrim. Hold on a second. No, that's Mishnah 1, right? There's Mishnah Bet. Yeah, here's Mishnah Bet. Amra parazo hareini nazira imomedet ani. Amar hadelet hazeh hareini nazir miftach ani. Beit Shammai omrim nazir, Beit Hillel omrim eino nazir. Okay, so they have this question here about whether the language is clear enough. And this relates to a general machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai that we will be looking at Bezrat Hashem next week. Okay, and this Mishnah fits in well with that, but let's focus on a different aspect. The question is, the cow said, "I will be a Nazir." So, are you saying you want to be a Nazir? Beit Shammai said, "Come on, obviously that's what you mean. The cow can't be a Nazir. You can be a Nazir." So there's just a roundabout way of saying you want to be a Nazir. Beit Hillel says no. The language isn't clear enough. That's the issue on the table. But again, I want to look at the slice of life here, the real life situation. What is motivating this person to declare himself to be a Nazir? Person is coming up to a cow. Now, what does the person want? He wants the cow to stand up. And what's happening? The cow
isn't standing up.
What?
Right. The cow
He
isn't
comes to
standing
the door. He wants the door to open. And the door
is not.
is recalcitrant, doesn't want to open. So the person says, if this door opens, I will be a Nazir. If this cow stands up, I will be a Nazir. In other words, why is the person being a Nazir? It's like a person taking a neder. If God grants me X, Y, Z, I will vow something, it's my way of paying God back, as it were. Taking a vow. That's one of the main purposes of a vow in the Torah. And here we're looking at a Nazir, again, as a form of a vow. It's not like an independent institution of a kind of personal sanctity that a person can attain. Okay? You're taking a vow, and many times people take a vow in a certain situation. You're frustrated, something's not happening, you say, if this happens, I will take a vow that X. That is one kind of motivation for becoming a Nazir, and that's looking at Nazir as a variation on the theme of vow. Let's look at the next Mishnah. Okay, Mazgulo et takos v'amar hareini nazir mimenu. Harei nazir. Why is this person taking a vow of nazirut? Kayla, you're muted.
No, I was just trying to think why. I mean, but
so that others will stop bothering them.
Okay, so others will stop bothering him, but why particularly
Maybe
about
he
this?
wanted to strengthen his self-control and not drink.
That's right. This guy has been through AA, okay? He's on the wagon, okay? And he's at a party and all of his friends are saying, come on, just take a little sip. Come on. And he knows he can't go there. So he says, I am a Nazir. Don't bother me. Fortify his resolve to withstand the temptation. And then they bring this example of the woman who was intoxicated, and they poured a cup and she said, I am a Nazirite. Very, very clear. She said, I can't handle any more wine. And I know I'll cave in if I don't make myself a Nazirite. So this is again like a neder, but here it's focusing on the wine aspect of it. You become a Nazir to separate yourself from wine. The person who feels the need to separate himself or herself from wine, okay, that would be the motivation to be a Nazir. Move on to, okay, we're going to learn these a bit out of order. Mishnah Zayin. Hareini Nazir lichshi yeli ben, v'nolad lo ben. Harei Nazir. Why is this person becoming a Nazir?
He's promising God that, as if to bribe God.
Okay, you could read it as a bribe. That's possible. I would.
Or a thank you.
Yes, I read it more as gratitude. Like, think in Hallel, Nidarai Lashem Ashalem Negdana L'chol Amo. When God grants me salvation, I will fulfill my vows. I will, joyfully come and proclaim the divine salvation before all and sundry. That's what the Nazir wants to do. I will make myself. This is focusing, I think, more on the sanctity, treating Nazir as a kind of sacrifice. Okay? The nidarim that you give to God when he has granted you salvation are sacrificial nidarim. And here the Nazir is a kind of self-sacrifice. I am making myself into a sacrificial offering. Okay? By the way, we have a model for that kind of Nazir in the Tanakh. Who's the
Yiftach.
model? What?
Yiftach.
Oh, well, okay, that's not exactly the model. Okay, he doesn't make her into a Nazirah. He says he's going to sacrifice her. Some say that means she became a Nazirah. But the clearer example is Shmuel. Chana says, if you grant me a son, I will devote him to God, and razor will not go upon his head. In other words, he will be a Nazir. His Nazirut is her thanksgiving for God granting her a son. That's the model here. Nazir is a form of thanksgiving. And one final model, Mishnah Hey. Hareini Nazir v'alai legaleach Nazir. Person takes a double vow. I will be a Nazir, and I will also shave a Nazir. Now, we'll see later on in the tractate, shaving a Nazir doesn't mean I'll go to barber school and learn how to cut off his hair. Shaving him means I will provide him with the sacrifices, because very often Nazirim weren't wealthy enough to afford the korbanot. If the Nazir always has to provide his own korbanot, then this is a matter only for wealthy people who can afford all of the sacrifices that a Nazir has to bring. Sometimes a poor person will want to be a Nazir. So when the poor person wants to be a Nazir, he will hope that some generous benefactor will provide the sacrificial animals that he can bring when he shaves off his hair at the end of his Nazirut. That's called Ligaleach Nazir. So I will make myself a Nazir, and at the same time, I will also undertake to shave off a Nazir, provide the sacrifices for another Nazir. And I think the Mishnah is equating them and saying to make yourself a Nazir and to provide the sacrifices for some other Nazir are two very similar things. They're both vows that you make in order to bring something before God, bring an offering to God. The Nazirut is also an offering before God. Okay? The same way that providing the sacrifices, I'm not prepared to be a Nazir myself, but I'll provide his sacrifices. So I will vicariously participate in his Nazirut. But it also means the same way I'm providing him with sacrifices, my Nazirut is also a kind of sacrifice. Okay, so we've seen different models here of what might be good about Nazirut. So these two chapters really have presented two different perspectives. The perspective of chapter 1, which is about Nazir as an offshoot of vows, that's echoed in the beginning of chapter 2, and the negative evaluation of vows that permeates Masechet Nidarim seems to be echoed in the beginning of chapter 1, and particularly in the characterizations of Shimshon. And on the other hand, in chapter 2, along with the kind of Nazirut that's just like a vow, we also have Nazirut as like a slice of life situation. Person is frustrated and he says, if this happens, I'll be a Nazir. Okay, so I'm saying, I'm so desperate for this to happen, I'll do anything to make this happen. Then you have the Nazirut as a way of fortifying your resolve. That, by the way, is a positive feature of Neder, which again rubs off on Nazir. And then you have the more unique kind of motivation for Nazir as a kind of expression of gratitude and a kind of sacrifice. Nazirut is a kind of sacrifice. So those are the models we saw in these two chapters. With that, we will close for this evening. Erev Tov, Chag Sameach, and as we say in Israel, Besorot Tovot. For all of us.
Thank you, Rabbi
Amen.
Walfish. Thank you, everyone, for learning today. Just 2 reminders. Yes, we are teaching next week. Yes, it is very close to Pesach, but Torah does not take breaks. And this class will also be meeting over Chol HaMoed Pesach. So, yes, it's Erev Yantiv, but we will still learn.
Okay.
And with that,
Thank
take
you.
care, everyone. And I hope to see you all next week.
Thanks.